vitamin A. And what do you do if you have genetic variants in some of the SNPs? They're called single nucleotide polymorphisms that are related to vitamin A. We are, I'm excited to talk about this because I do a lot of genetic testing and I see a lot of this happening. Uh, and, people want to know, well, what do I do? So I'm Dr. Rita Marie, and I'm on a mission to transform our broken system into a true healthcare system that all of you get to benefit from, and to train practitioners so that more and more and more and more practitioners are focusing on getting to the real underlying causes of what's going on for you so it can truly help you rather than just giving you something to cover up the symptoms. So, what do genes have to do with vitamin A? And why do you care? That's the important part. What does it matter to you? If your patient has vitamin A SNPs, variant single nucleotide polymorphisms in their genes, are they doomed to vitamin A deficiency? If you have them, are you doomed to vitamin A deficiency? That's what this episode is all about. So, if you or your clients are suffering from dry eyes, skin problems, respiratory problems, gut issues, night blindness, or dry eyes, then this episode is for you. Also, something you want to think about is suboptimal immune system, that you're catching every cold and flu that goes around. So, why is vitamin A so important? Looking at my notes here, I don't want to miss anything. Okay, so let's start by talking about the chemistry of vitamin A. Vitamin A is a fat soluble vitamin, and it is made in the body mostly, or it can come from food, but it's synthesized from two molecules of beta carotene. Beta carotene is the precursor to vitamin A, and it is actually water soluble. And those things mean something, and I'm going to tell you why in a moment. So there's an enzyme, and it's called beta carotene oxygenase 1. It's an enzyme that converts the precursor, beta carotene, into vitamin A, which is active, which is also called retinol. So, okay, this enzyme that converts is important, and that's the focus, I guess, of some of the genes, right? Not the focus, but that's the target of the genes. So there's genes that code for it. One is called the BCM01. And that gene is associated with the synthesis of vitamin A from beta carotene via this beta carotene oxygenase 1 enzyme. So people with certain variants of the gene are subject to not converting their beta carotene very well into preformed vitamin A. And that's important to understand. So we get beta carotene in a lot of foods, right? You can get it in fruits and vegetables, red bell peppers, green leafy vegetables, a whole lot of different foods, and it gets converted. Most people who are following a really healthy, whole foods, plant-based, plant-strong diet, like I am, get tons of beta carotene in their diet, but they may be low in vitamin A if they have variants in this particular gene. Now, there's just not one gene, there's a bunch of them. So there's like 5 different BCM01s that I see on the genetic testing that I do. I personally have, I think, 3 of them, and they're yellow. And yellow on the report means they are heterozygous. Heterozygous means that you got one gene from one parent that was the quote unquote normal, the most common, and another gene from another parent that was people like to call it defective. I don't like to call it defective because some of these variants actually help you. So it was a variant, it was different. So I have 3 different ones that are yellow. Now, little anecdote. When I first started to do a plant-based diet, and I was eating tons of vegetables, I was also drinking carrot juice. And I was wondering why my skin turned orange. And then my skin, I love the color of my skin now. I used to be very pale, and now I have this glow to my skin year round, whether I'm in the sun or not. Beta carotene is pigment, and it provides pigment in your skin. So if not all of the beta carotene is being converted into vitamin A, you've got a lot of beta carotene floating around, and it's going to change the pigmentation of your skin because it's not being converted downstream to vitamin A. So I like I said, I like that I have this healthy glow, but it never occurred to me that it was an inborn error of metabolism, if you will. It was a genetic thing that I had that yellow skin as a result because I had this particular gene, the BCM01. So I think about this a lot because I do this a lot. I do this every day almost, looking at clients and looking at students. And in my nutritional endocrinology practitioner training, where I'm training practitioners, we talk about genetic SNPs a lot. And so if I have this SNP, what do I have to do about it? But here's the thing. There's nothing wrong with building up beta carotene in your system. It just makes you look a little more orange. If the whites of your eyes start to turn orange, then it might be a little much, but usually that's not the cause of the whites of your eyes turning orange. That's usually an excess bilirubin. So it's more of a jaundice situation, but don't worry about it. Now, there's these particular types of tests that you can see at health fairs and a lot of events that test you for your antioxidant status, is what they say. Every time I've been to one of these and I get tested, they go, holy cow, you're off the charts. Why am I off the charts? Because I eat a ton of beta carotene rich foods and I have a little bit sluggish working of this particular enzyme. So, with certain variants of the gene, it can be associated with up to 60% of a reduction in that enzyme activity. Doesn't mean it's not happening at all. It's just 60% reduced. Okay. What that means is that either the person needs to take a preformed vitamin A supplement, and it depends on the variants. When I see some yellow, like I mentioned before, the heterozygous, then okay, I will, work with them on it of increasing their beta carotene rich foods if they're not taking enough. And then let's see if there's signs of vitamin A deficiency. I do have a little bit of signs of vitamin A deficiency in that I don't see as well at night blindness, as I do during the day. But most of the other stuff I don't have. Now, as a teenager, I had the acne, which is common from lack of vitamin A, but I was eating Cheetos and M&Ms back then. You know what I mean? I wasn't eating the way I am now. So once I started eating better, then I never had those symptoms anymore, but I also didn't, I did have starting to have my palms turn orange. So those are the genes associated. So now, if the person is already eating tons of vitamin A and they have vitamin A deficiency symptoms, catching cold a lot, the dry skin, eczema, acne, infertility issues, growth issues, delayed development in children, respiratory, a lot of upper respiratory and lower respiratory. So upper respiratory here in the nose, so sinus issues, lung issues, catching a lot of colds that just drop into the lungs. But even things like chronic diarrhea, celiac, cystic fibrosis, pancreatic disorders, bile duct blockage, so not digesting fats very well, zinc or iron deficiency, small bowel obstructions, alcohol, tendency to drink more alcohol. I'm not sure what the mechanism is for that. Um, those kind of things can indicate that there's a problem with vitamin A, right? And so what else? Let me just talk about before I move on to what else we can do about it and how we can identify it. Let me just talk about one other gene that I know about, which is the retinol binding receptor. And it's called RBP, retinol binding protein. And it's a specific protein that codes for the cell membrane, where the binding, where hormones and vitamins, they bind to cells so they can get indoors into the cell. And this particular one is for vitamin A, for retinol, which is what it's called. So these variants can result in not being able to absorb the vitamin A appropriately. And for those of you who are a little geeky and want to know the science, I'm going to read my description of this, of the particular nucleotides and all that are involved. So basically, a particular substitution of at a nucleotide 1549 that results in substitutions of an amino acid called asparagine for isoleucine in this gene, and aspartate for glycine in another place on this gene. What the heck does that mean? When we have variants in our genes, when we have single nucleotide polymorphisms, what we see is that these what it really is that these nucleotides that code the DNA, they're switched around a little bit, right? And there's 4 different nucleotides that form into the DNA, and when they get switched around a little bit, then the gene doesn't perform as well. So that's for the geeks among you who want to understand the science. So let's talk about why it's important. A lot of people think about vitamin A and beta carotene deficiencies as causing dry eyes and night blindness. And yes, it does. But it also causes all those other issues that we don't quite think about when it comes to vitamin A. And during this time of exposure to a particular virus, I have been recommending people, if you get it, if you get sick, whether it's this virus or any other virus, take a higher dose of vitamin A, but also D and zinc and a couple of others at the very beginning. So I personally, if I feel like anything's coming on, I'll take 100,000 IUs of vitamin A for 3 days. Now, that's a huge dose. That's 20 times the recommendation. But I only take it for 3 days. So this is something to be important to take care about. If you're a health practitioner and you're recommending A to patients, make sure you tell them that it's only for 3 days. So I have a funny story. I was working with a patient way back when I was first starting in practice. It was probably 25, 30 years ago. And she had this upper respiratory, she was having this problem. And I said, okay, well, here's a vitamin A. And at that time, I had a little dispensary in my office. I gave her a bottle of vitamin A. The vitamin A bottle they're small, they're inexpensive. They're about $10, $12, maybe a little bit more now. But you only need, it lasts forever. So I basically said, I want you to take 10 drops of the vitamin A for 3 days. She calls me up the next day and she says, I'm out of vitamin A. Do you have any more? And I'm like, what? She said, I've been taking 10 dropperfuls, like you said. Well, a dropperful is more like 20-ish, somewhere between 15 and 25 drops. Oh God. I'm like, oh my God, she's taking the whole bottle in a day and a half. I said, stop. No more vitamin A for you. It was 10 drops. So it taught me that I should write it down, be very explicit. And I'm being very explicit with you guys as you're listening, whether you're listening for your patients or you're listening for someone else, right? For yourself or a family member. 20 drops is usually 5,000 per drop. So I basically say I want you to take 100,000 IUs for 3 days. And the brands that I personally use, it's about 5,000. Some of them are a little bit less. I've never seen it more. So that would be 20 drops, not 20 droppers per day, and that you stop after 3 days. Even if you still have symptoms, what you do is you don't stop completely. You stop the 100K, but then you drop it down to 5,000 to 10,000. Now, if a person has some of these SNPs, they may need to go into the 10,000-ish range because they're not getting as much from their beta carotene that they're taking in. Although I think it probably doesn't matter because the vitamin A is preformed. But if they also have the retinol binding protein gene variation, then you want to do more of the vitamin A. So when they have the conversion issue, you maybe need some preformed vitamin A, and you can get it in drops. And like I said, the normal dose 1 drop a day, that bottle is going to last a year. So it's like the best $12 investment. I personally do it. I don't do it all the time, but periodically I'll take some of that because I have 3 of these snips. But for most people, you don't need to if you're eating enough beta carotene rich food. So that's another thing I say, okay, if you have this conversion issue, just flood that enzyme with a lot more to convert and more will get through. Does that make sense? So you're maybe not 100% depleted in this enzyme, maybe 60%. So why I talked about myths, right? What are the myths about vitamin A? One of the myths is, oh, everybody needs to take preformed vitamin A, not beta carotene, because the body needs to convert it. And the foods that contain the preformed vitamin A usually are beef, poultry, fish, liver, and eggs. And I don't know about you, but I don't eat any of those foods. And I don't plan to eat any of those foods, right? But I don't really necessarily need preformed vitamin A in my day-to-day diet. If somebody has multiple red homozygous where both parents gave them that, they're going to have a higher reduction, may need it. I take it periodically for insurance purposes, like, to ensure that I have enough, that my immune system's strong. And I take it whenever I'm exposed to somebody with an infectious disease or I myself feel that it's coming on. All right. What else? I'm just looking to see if there's anything I missed. Yeah. Again, I want to reinforce toxicity, toxicity, toxicity. Don't take high doses of vitamin A for very long. If you haven't been tested, so let's talk about that. If you haven't done a genetics test, any of the on the market genetics test, I think have this. I've done 23andMe and then run it through some filters through, say, genetic detoxification or metabolic healing or strategene. And they'll tell you, I don't think strategene does though. So I think metabolic healing and MTHFR support, those are interpretations. You can get a 23andMe, you can get an ancestry.com. You can also go to self-decode. And I can put a link in the chat of how you can get to self-decode and get their test. They will either take your 23andMe and run it through their filter, or they will have you run a new one. And I'm about to run my own again through them because they claim to have a whole lot more. I'll keep you guys posted on another video. So bottom line, eat more green leafy vegetables, broccoli, orange and yellow vegetables like red bell peppers and orange bell peppers, sweet potatoes and squash and pumpkin if your blood sugar tolerates it, fruits if your blood sugar tolerates it. Orange and yellow seem to be the key to beta carotene. Oranges, mangoes, cantaloupe, papayas. And then for preformed vitamin A, these are products I don't use, but dairy products, liver, beef, chicken, fish like salmon and eggs. So that's the story on vitamin A. And if the gene thing is really fascinating to you, because there's so many genes related to certain nutrients, related to detox pathways, related to the function of the various body parts, that you want to know more about how you can create a customized nutrition profile or plan for yourself or for your patients, then we're doing a 3-day event in June, and I highly recommend that you attend. I'll tell you the link here, and you can put it in the comments, and we'll post it in the comments that you can. It's hard one to remember. I got to get a shorter link. It's functionalnutrigenomicsworkshop.com. Functionalnutrigenomicsworkshop.com. And we are going to explore the genes that impact digestion and blood sugar and cardiovascular. I have some really cool speakers coming, like Ben Lynch and Christy Sutton, author of the Genetic Detox, or founder of the Genetic Detoxification and author of a book that goes with it. I've got Joel Kahn just agreed to do it, and he's a functional cardiologist, and he's going to talk about the genetic links with cardiovascular disease and what testing goes along with that. And then we have Steph Jackson, who's big on, she's huge on the microbiome. And then Lisa Filati, who is like so good at the clinical and the labs and the coordination. They're going to be sharing with you how you can use this in your practice. If you're not a health practitioner, you're welcome to attend, but be forewarned, a lot of chemistry and a lot of, mechanisms because I feel like that's good. Now, a lot of my patients love it and they sign up for this because they love to know that. But if you're kind of like, just tell me what to do, then probably not a good thing to go to. So functionalnutrigenomics.com. And then we'll continue this conversation about other genetics related lives and YouTube videos and all that planned in the pipe. We also have the podcast. So check out the podcast at reinventhealthcare.com. So comment below. Tell me you're interested. Subscribe to the channel, and then you'll know every time we go live. Follow me on Instagram or Facebook. And until next time, be your best self. Thank you so much.